Hi, welcome to Simplify Consulting's monthly wealth session. As a leadership team, we challenge ourselves to meet each month to discuss relevant topics. And for the first month, we thought we'd record it in the hope that someone may find it interesting. So let's see how it goes. Today, we're going to discuss FCA change review. I'm Matt. I'll be hosting and I'll be putting a few of the team on the spot to get their thoughts and views on a few questions and see where it takes us. So my first question, what role do we think the FCA can play in transformational change delivery in financial services? Serena, it's your first week with Simplify, so I'm going to throw you under the bus and ask you to answer that one first.
Oh, I'm used to it by now, Matt. It's absolutely fine. I feel like part of the furniture. Hello, yes, I'm Serena. So to answer your question there, I think the FCA have oversight over various firms in the industry, as we know. So things like transformational change is a constant ongoing conversation through meetings, reviews, things like that. So I think particularly there's areas around customer and regulation and any high impact changes, then of course they've got a big part to play in sharing information and lessons learned. I think it's really important in that respect for the FCA to actually provide the guidance where the organisations that we tend to work with and we see, they'll play more of a part in using that information and shaping it for the specifics of their business. I think that's quite an important area there, but the FCA are there as a support mechanism to flag things and ultimately protect the customer. So I think with respect to some of those large scale transformation programs that go on, it's quite insular at times for organizations and businesses that we see. So, they do have a part as the FCA as a body to externalize some of that thinking and some of the viewpoints. And I think that's where a lot of value could be added, because it's very easy when you're within something, a piece of work, a program of change, a business itself, to just think about the people aspect for you and your immediate team, rather than look at the implications it might have on customers or agencies and things like that. So that's some of those things that I think they could play a part in, but also perhaps something like roundtabling discussions in a safe environment, whereby it's an opportunity for people to be invited to have a conversation with an impartial body that has in their duty of care to look after those customers, as opposed to it being led by particular organisations.
Do you think, Serena, that the regulators should be more involved up front in some companies' transformational change? Do you think they should be almost one of the first external parties to be engaged to assess the change that's proposed, particularly where it impacts customers, shareholders, employees, etc., and it's going to cost a lot of money?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, really, in terms of the scale and the proportions of what that transformational piece of work is to the business. So, for example, something large scale like an M&A is very high impact to lots of people that you've just mentioned. So with that, if you introduce the FCA into those discussions at the earliest possible time, you're more likely, from what I've seen and experienced, to have a better track record of actually getting things through, highlighting risks, getting some of their knowledge and experiences with other organizations that have gone through that. So these are not uncommon topics, but from a day-to-day point of view, if there's some basic things, as long as it's complying, and that's why they've got their guidance and regulations and things in play, the smaller activities of change can just happen as long as they're ticking the right boxes like TCF and whatnot. But I think certainly for those large scale things, it's really imperative to get them involved at the early stages.
Do you think there would need to be some form of a culture change almost for companies to be able to think that way, to let's get the FCA involved as a collaborative partner in transformational change, as opposed to being a regulatory body?
Yeah, that's an interesting shift in mindset, isn't it? To kind of think of the FCA as a delivery kind of partner, that they can actually help you and guide you along some of the things. They've obviously seen a lot of these transformations over the last few years and seen where there have been issues, and they can actually play quite a key role in helping companies through. But it does involve the providers kind of changing their mindset a little bit and using the FCA constructively.
I think you're oh, sorry, go on.
No, Serena, carry on.
I think to both your points as well, from a cultural aspect, it is the words of the FCA is quite a powerful authority. So I think there's natural nervousness around employees from all levels in having those discussions. So I think it's a really, really fair comment to make. Hence why I think the suggestions around the roundtables and discussions like that could open up that, because at the end of the day, they are just normal people running that organisation that wants to support and watch that industry grow and improve. So they're reliant on businesses coming to the table with opportunities and ideas and challenge as well.
Yeah, and that's interesting. We've seen that, haven't we, in certain areas, the kind of the whole advice piece and the sandboxes they put up to encourage firms to be innovative in the advice space, recognising the advice gap was a big area that needed filling. I guess one of the challenges for them is ultimately they're an independent body, and that it's the governance and the assurance they probably need to be focused on in terms of looking at companies' change portfolios and transformational change activity and protecting the interests of shareholders and customers and employees. But guiding, advising isn't their role, and that line can become quite grey. What you wouldn't want to get into is an anti-competitive kind of world where they were, advising one company potentially at the detriment to others. So it is a fine line for them to tread. And I wonder with them coming out with the change guidance, it's more focused upon best practice and methodology and what good looks like, rather than kind of typical consultancy style advice to say you should do this or you should do that. And I guess for them, they could be really careful they tread that line fairly.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's all about kind of how the change is managed rather than what the change is, isn't it? Because I think ultimately, as long as the change is positive for the customer, they're going to be supportive, and they can, they've shown that they're happy for innovation to take place. What they need to make sure is that the change is happening in the right way.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Serena. Let's move on to then and talk a bit more about change more broadly. Dom, why do you think it's so difficult to deliver transformation?
Well, that's a big topic, isn't it?
Have we got time?
Yeah. I would say you could go on forever discussing this. I mean, some of the things that I would call out is because some of these big changes, they involve the coordination of a lot of people in a lot of different areas. That's internal parties, external parties, and having everyone focused on the change and the delivery and the benefits that are trying to be embedded in the business as a result of that change is really difficult. I think sometimes there's not enough focus done up front in helping everyone understand what the change is and why it's taking place, so that everyone is clear on the direction and everyone is clear on the result and where they're trying to get to, so that when they're in the detail, in the weeds of the change, they can call back to why they're doing it in the first place. I think we've all gone in programs that have gone on for multiple years, and I think if you actually took it back when you're kind of discussing something really detailed in year 2, why are you doing it? Are you really taking it back to the first principles, or are you just trying to get something over the line? Is it a result of scope creep, etc.? I think the other thing I call out is around kind of positive reinforcement bias or confirmation bias. Around everyone has the tendency to look at things through kind of the most positive result, and tend to overemphasize how quickly things can get done. They don't look at the pitfalls and plan effectively so that they understand truly how long things are going to take. I think we've seen where programs have started out with completely unrealistic timescales because everyone's thought, well, actually the requirements can be done in this short space of time and it won't need any longer, and then testing is only going to take this amount of time. And actually when you get into it, all of these activities take much longer because of the detail that you come across. So those are the 2 areas that I'd really focus on. Don't know anyone else's thoughts.
Do you think there's a role there though for an independent body like the FCA to perform that, if you like, independent oversight, because you're right, people do get too bogged down in the weeds of the detail and sometimes are unable to take that step back. Is that a role that is perhaps something that the FCA could assist with, maybe? Just throwing that thought out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly an interesting topic of thought. Whether they'd agree to that or not is a different thing. But I think Dom raised a great point there, and I think it's actually, if you take it a step back, and Sheila, it might tie into what you've just said, is everybody's idea of what transformational change is really different. So that conversation has to happen as well, and perhaps that is something that the FCA can help with from an industry perspective. But you asked probably any of us, and that will be a different conversation for another day, I'm sure, but we probably will have a different nuance on what we feel that transformational change is, individually, let alone an organisation of scale. So back to your points, Dom, of building blocks and things like that, it's completely up to each organisation to keep that communication going as to the hows and the whys and the whats, and if there is a change in status quo, that people know why and why things can and can't be delivered, and what that strategic intent is around a lot of it too.
Dom, I was going to ask you, obviously we've all experienced an acceleration and an increase in the amount of change that's going on at the moment. It seems that everyone you speak to is insanely busy with change programs. The question that you mentioned around why are we doing this in the first place, do you think that's more visible or less visible at the moment?
I would say at the moment, from my experience, the projects I've been involved with in the last kind of year or so, actually it's been more visible. I think people are clearer on what they're trying to get out. I think people are not necessarily committing budget to something with less tangible aims and results. So I think people have been more focused on, if they want to do a change and they're going to commit to it, they want to see the results. So, and I think that's been a positive move in the last few months. I don't know, obviously other people who've been involved in projects may have a different opinion on that.
Right, Dom. I think the strategic imperatives are almost greater than they've ever been before. I think we've come through a pandemic where manual processes have been tested to the extreme, and those businesses that have previously invested in digital capabilities have thrived, have managed to keep the lights on, have keep service levels up. And I think those that haven't are now looking at digital transformation not as a, well, dare we do it, dare we invest, or almost a mandate of we've got to go and do this to compete, we've got to go and do this to survive. And that's one element. I think the second element is the cost challenge. And actually in the past, I think businesses may not have had the clear focus on their cost base and where they could potentially derive some savings or reinvest capacity that they create in other parts of the business to help them grow. And the ability to grow is really constrained when you don't have an efficient, effective organisation that's structured in a way that facilitates rapid speed to market. And I think, again, in the context of the past year and some of the challenges we faced, those strategic imperatives are really important now. And those companies that don't invest the time and don't think about how they're going to evolve and how they're going to transform and grow will be the ones that get left behind.
Cool. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. I think the final area I wanted to explore, and I know this is something that we put a lot of emphasis on within Simplify and encourage our clients to do the same. But Sheila, I'll come to you on this one. Do you think enough is done across the industry to learn lessons from previous mistakes when implementing change?
Well, there's two ways of answering this, the short and the long. The short is no. I don't think enough is being done across the industry. The longer answer, obviously, is it varies massively from one company to the next. But generally, the overreaching culture seems to be that not enough focus is given to lessons learned and making improvements in the future. What I would say from an industry overall, I think there is very little, if any, sharing of lessons learned across companies. I've seen, in my experience, hardly any instances of where we've had a big for example, a big regulatory change which has affected multiple companies, but there's no culture or idea of getting together afterwards to share lessons learned and to share ideas and things like that, and to help improve things for the future for similar things like that. I'll use examples recently of GDPR, for example, MiFID II being another one. I'm sure there are lots and lots of lessons learned at many companies from those kind of huge changes. Previously Carl mentioned about obviously the strategic focus now that needs to happen for those companies that haven't digitalized. There are probably lots of lessons learned from those companies who have that could be shared with the wider industry, and I don't see that kind of thing happening very often. I wonder if that is a role that possibly even the FCA could help with, because or a body like Tizer or somebody like that who has a reach across the entire industry and has the ability to pull together forums of members and interested parties to discuss these things. Serena, your point, roundtable discussions and things, they could include lessons learned and how we can improve things going forwards in relation to these kind of change projects that go on.
That's an interesting perspective, Sheila. I think this is a competitive landscape. If I've gone and delivered a project really well, really efficiently and really effectively, am I going to go and tell my competition how I did it and what I did? Equally, if I made a balls up of it, am I going to go and tell them what I did wrong? And that's the challenge, isn't it? We live in a competitive world where someone separate, someone independent either has to do that, and that's where consultancies come in and they turn up at clients and they say, well, we did this over here, but we wouldn't do this the same way again, we'd do it differently. Or the likes of FCA. I don't really see the pressure, the mandate upon those businesses that have been through that journey and suffered some of the kind of the issues that they have, whether it be kind of a long time to deliver, whether it be cost overrun, budgets blown, sharing that kind of information. I think if you look at it more on an organic basis, evidently a number of organisations are not now looking at multi-year transformation programs. They're looking at incremental delivery really quickly. And so, you know, you don't wait 2 years to deliver something, because most CEOs and COOs have moved on in those 2 years anyway, because they've got a 2-year kind of career path. So I think what we'll increasingly see is that concept of kind of fintech thinking around implementing change really quickly, around realizing benefits and moving on to the next thing. But inevitably, some businesses need to do that big bang transformation first.
Yeah, what you don't want to do is stifle innovation, do you? So obviously, some of the sandboxes, the FCA have put together the digital sandbox, which they commented on earlier, are all geared around encouraging innovation. And what you don't want to do is make companies afraid to take the first leap. And also, you don't want those that have been successful to necessarily worry that what they're doing right is going to be shared with everyone else, and they'll lose their competitive advantage that they've made.
Great. Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Serena.
I suppose a lot of that comes down to the financial side as well, which we've mentioned before. You know, if there's fines at stake and things like that, that's not really something from a publicity point of view that, you know, people want advertised particularly, you know. So there's an element of protection, but also an element of course, as some of you have said, bringing in other expertise that actually can provide that extra layer to say, oh no, don't do that, that's caused problems in XYZ place, maybe try something different like this.
I think very much so that there's still a huge amount to do with regards to having a culture of lessons learned and improvements. We're always seen to be wanting to move forward so quickly. Certainly from my experience, I think there's very much a case of, okay, well, we've done that now, that's in, let's move on to the next thing. But very often the time and the money isn't there necessarily to do the post-implementation reviews and to move forwards in a structured way from the point of view of, well, what did work and what didn't. I think, Dom, your point with regards to moving more in towards the sort of the fintech culture and that kind of thing, I don't disagree with you in the slightest, but I think there are still lessons that we have learned from previous experience that sometimes they kind of organically get learnt, but often they don't. And I see numbers of occasions where the same old mistakes are being made over and over again, and it doesn't seem to move forwards. I think we need to take a step back and just go back to basics almost and say, look, we've done lots of things in the past, and the best way to learn is by things that don't work necessarily or don't work particularly well. I really don't think that as an industry we leverage it enough against that to actually drive improvement forwards.
Yeah, I do agree, and we don't even. I don't think organisations are even very good at sharing that information within themselves. Actually, I think they do make the same mistakes over and over again, and even if we just focused on what they could do to learn from their own mistakes, I think that would actually, as an industry, improve things throughout.
Great. Okay. Thanks guys for sharing your views. That's all we've got time for now. Thanks everyone for watching as well. I hope you found some of the content useful. Keep an eye out for future sessions. We will be running these every month. But thanks for now, and speak to you all soon.